Hello. So we now analyze the other side of the market, which is the supply side of the market. I am your host, Elias. So in this video, I want us to look at the supply side and what affect the supply side of the market. So let's quickly look at the outline. So we'll look at the law of supply and the supply schedule and supply curve distinction. And finally, we will look at the determinants of supply and the determinants on what determines the quantity supplied. For further reading, you can continue looking at Mankiw, chapter number 4, and McConnell, chapter number 3. Okay, so let's begin by defining supply, which is the amount of a product that producers are willing and able to make available for sale at each of a series of possible prices during a specified period of time. Now, it should be noted also here that we are looking at a series of prices as well as a specified period of time, which means that for supply, we are not only looking at a given price level, but several or a series of prices. And out of those prices, we want to see how the suppliers will be behaving when prices are changing. And we should also note that we are not only looking at the period today, but even the period in the future. Therefore, suppose that price was to increase tomorrow or next week, how will the suppliers behave? So we should also note that we also have the willingness and ability to supply, and with this then we see that the amounts of a commodity supplied are defined for over a specified period of time for a series of prices, given that the suppliers are willing and able. Okay, so this means that supply shows the quantities of a product that will be supplied at various possible prices, holding other factors constant. Meaning anything that may influence supply is held constant and the only price is observed. So take note of the two items that stand out: the willingness of firms or suppliers to make available the products on the market, as well as their ability to do so. So if they are willing to supply but they are not able to supply, it means supply will not be defined. And if they are able to supply but not willing, we will not be able to define supply, because if they withheld their resources, then supply will not be affected. Okay, so now let's then state the law of supply, which states that ceteris paribus, an increase in a product's price will increase the quantity of it supplied. And conversely, for a decrease in price, we will observe a decrease in quantity supplied, which means that there is a positive or direct relationship between the price of a given commodity and the quantity of it supplied. The higher the price, the more suppliers are motivated, because their goal is to make profit. And if they see a price going up, to them, they feel producing more and therefore selling all those items will give them more profit. So any item that is in their jurisdiction and they are producing it, if it receives a higher price on the market, the supply for that item is likely to go up. So take note that we also use the ceteris paribus assumption here, because supply of a product is not only influenced by the price of that item, but many other factors that one may want to consider, which may include the price of related goods, the input price, the technology, and so on. So let's look at supply schedule and the supply curve. Now, a supply schedule is a table showing the total quantity of a good or service that producers wish to supply at each price. In contrast, the supply curve is a graph or a graphical representation of the quantity supplied of a given product as well as its price. In other words, it's a graph showing the total quantity of a good or service that producers wish to supply at each price. So what this is the data that is presented in a table is now plotted on a graph, and therefore we turn its name to a supply curve. With the aid of a simple illustration, the supply schedule will take this structure where we have prices ranging from 2 all the way to 8 and quantity supplied ranging from 0 all the way to 6,000. And you will notice that as price is increasing, the quantity supplied of a given item is also increasing. If we are to plot this data on a graph, which we call the supply curve, so we can put the prices that we have and the quantity supplied associated with that. And clearly, we see that if we plot this data and moving down, we will see that the structure looks like this one here. And if we join these with a smooth curve, we will have our supply curve. Therefore, we see that the supply curve shows a positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied of that item. So the shape of the supply curve reflects the reality that the number of firms who will be willing to supply a given commodity when price increases on the market will also increase. So when price goes up, the number of firms will increase because their motive is to make profit, and a higher price is one indicator for them that they are likely to make profit if they sell more. It also implies that the amount of goods or services that firms are willing to sell will increase with a rise in the price of those goods and services. It should be noted that it is possible for the supply curve to start from the origin. The one we presented did not start from the origin because we assumed that when the quantity demanded of a given product is 0, the firms will charge a price of 2. But when the price starts from the origin, it means that the quantity supplied will also be 0. Therefore, as price goes up, firms will be willing to release many units on the market because their motive is to make profit. Let's look at the determinants of supply and the quantity supplied. The first one being the on price of a given commodity, and then we have the input price. We also have the technology. So changes in technology will affect the supply of the product. On price technology will only affect the quantity supplied. The rest of these factors that we are listing down will affect the supply in totality. Okay, so price of related goods will also affect the supply. We also have expectations, the number of sellers on the market, and finally the taxes and the subsidies. It should be noted that these are not the only factors that affect supply. There are many factors that you can explore. Okay, let's begin with on price of a given commodity. So if we assume ice cream, and then we note that changes in the price of ice cream will affect the quantity supplied of ice cream and not the entire supply, which means that changes in on price will affect the quantity supplied, but it will not affect the supply in general. So you will notice that if price increases from 2 to 4, quantity supplied increases to 2,000. Price goes to 6, quantity supplied increases to 4,000. Therefore, we see that then there is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied, and therefore price causes a movement along the supply curve, and this price will not shift the supply curve. Let's look at other factors, and these factors will shift the supply curve if anything happens to them. The first one we look at is the input price. Now, to produce a good or service, producers use various inputs such as machines, labor, and so on. And if the prices of these machines, this labor, and all the inputs brought into the production process reduce, it means it has become cheaper for the firm to produce, and therefore supply will increase. Conversely, if the prices for these inputs increase, then the firms will be incurring higher costs, and therefore the supply for the product reduces. Graphically, with price on the vertical axis and quantity supplied on the horizontal axis with our initial supply curve S1, when the price of inputs reduce, the firms supply more units on the market, and therefore the supply curve shifts down and to the right. So take note, for supply, a downward shift and to the right is an indication that there is an increase in the supply of a product. When the price for these inputs, however, increases, and with price on the vertical axis and quantity supplied on the horizontal, and S1 being our initial supply curve, an increase in the price of the inputs will reduce the supply, and therefore the supply curve will shift up and to the left. Okay, so the other factor or determinant is technology. So changes in technology affect the supply of a given commodity. If there is an improvement in technology, we expect that firms will supply more on the market, because they will be able to produce commodities which will be in an efficient way. And with that, we see that any deterioration in technology will lead to a reduction in quantity supplied. And graphically, if we are considering our initial supply curve S1 and that technology has improved, it means that the firm will be able to supply more units on the market, first produce more, and then supply more units on the market, and therefore our supply curve will shift down and to the right to S2. If, on the other hand, technology deteriorates, then that means that our supply will shift to the left, up and to the left, because supply will reduce due to this negative feedback, due to this deterioration in technology. Okay, so the other determinant is the price of related goods. So remember, when we are looking at this, we distinguish between substitute goods and complement goods. Now, graphically, let's start with substitute goods, and with price on vertical and quantity supplied on the horizontal, and our initial supply curve S1. If we assume that a certain firm is producing two substitutes, let's assume, say, Fanta and Mirinda. If the firm notices that the price of Fanta has gone up, it means, given that all other factors are held constant, then the firm will have to produce more of the Fanta, because Fanta will generate more revenue and therefore more profit for the firm. And this will cause the firm to reduce the resources needed for the production of Mirinda. Mirinda supply will reduce. And if the price, on the other hand, price of Fanta reduces, it means that the firm will see Fanta as a less profitable business. And therefore, the firm will channel resources away from some of the resources away from the production of Fanta and channel them to the production of Mirinda, which means that the supply for Mirinda will increase, and therefore the supply curve will shift down and to the right to S2. As stated earlier, an increase in the price of Fanta will cause the firms to supply more of Fanta, because they will channel resources needed for the production of Mirinda away towards the production of Fanta, and therefore Mirinda supply will reduce and the supply curve will shift up and to the left. We also have the expectations about the future. So your expectations about the future may affect your supply for a good or service. If you expect prices to be up tomorrow, say prices for mini meal to increase tomorrow, it means as a firm you will hold back all the mini meals, keep them in your warehouse, and then release them tomorrow when price is high. Meaning today supply will be low. So with price on our vertical axis and quantity supplied on our horizontal axis, and our initial supply curve S1, if there is expectation that prices will reduce tomorrow or in the future, say maybe next week, it means that firms will have to sell off all their items today before the price goes down tomorrow. And as such, we will have an increase in the supply today, and therefore the supply curve will shift down and to the right. On the other hand, if the firms expect prices to increase in the future, say tomorrow or next week, it means that today, for the mini meal suppliers, for example, the firms will hold the mini meal in the warehouse and release them in the future when the prices are high. This means that today supply will reduce, and therefore the supply curve will shift up and to the left. The other determinant is the number of sellers in the market. If there is an increase in the number of sellers on the market, it means we will have a lot of quantities produced for a given item, and therefore supply will increase. For example, if diapers become more profitable due to an increased beds, more firms who are willing and able to produce diapers will join the market to supply the diapers. As such, the supply for diapers will increase, and therefore the supply curve will shift down and to the right. And illustrated with our initial supply curve S1, an increase in supply will shift the supply curve down and to the right. And conversely, a decrease in supply will shift the supply curve up and to the left. We also have the taxes and subsidies being the determinants of supply, and noted that businesses treat most taxes as costs, because if the tax is high, it means that then firms will be incurring more costs in producing a given item whose tax is high. And if we assume that all taxes are levied on the suppliers, then with the higher cost, it means the production cost has gone up, and therefore supply reduces. Conversely, the subsidy is a reverse of the taxes. If we assume that all subsidies are given to suppliers, it means the cost of production reduces for suppliers, and therefore supply of a given commodity increases. Graphically, if we have a price on the vertical axis and quantity supplied on the horizontal axis, and our initial supply curve S1, for the effects of a tax starting with the tax, if there is a reduction in the tax which firms are supposed to pay, it means the cost of production reduces. And because of this, firms will be more able to release a lot of units on the market, and therefore supply for such a commodity will increase, and the supply curve will shift down and to the right. On the other hand, if taxes were to increase, the firms will have a higher cost and therefore they will supply less, which will cause the supply curve to shift up and to the left. In the case of the subsidies, if there is a subsidy given to the suppliers of a given commodity to promote them so that they supply more, it means the firm's supply will increase because the cost of production will somewhat reduce. And therefore, the supply curve will shift down and to the right. And if the subsidies are removed, it means that the supply curve will shift up and to the left. Now, we should note that price is not the only determinant of supply. There are many factors that we have looked at, and therefore, if we are to present this into a function, then this should be quantity supplied. Okay, then the quantity supplied will be affected by all these factors that we have indicated. Now, because we hold all these factors constant, okay, then our quantity supplied, we write it as simply the function of price. So when drawing the curve, we only consider the price, and therefore quantity supplied becomes the function of price. Let's look at the market supply, and if we assume that the market is made up of 3 producers, the market supply therefore for a product will be the sum of the individual producers' supply for a product, and assuming that price is fixed on the market. So what we see is that for firm A, at a price of 1.75, 5,000 units are supplied, and at a price of 3, 10,000 units are supplied. For firm B, at a price of 1.75, 10,000 units are supplied, and at a price of 3, 30,000 units are supplied. If we bring in firm C, at a price of 1.75, 10,000 units are supplied, and at a price of 3, 25 units are supplied. And if we add 5,000 at a price of 175, 5,000 plus 10,000 plus 10,000, we will have 25,000 units on the market supplied when price is 1.75. And if price is 3, we will have 10,000 plus 30,000 plus 25,000, which is 65,000 units supplied on the market. And so, graphically, it means that our market supply will look like that, and it will be more elastic compared to the individual supply curves. However, we will turn to the subject of elasticity in our next unit. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. If you have questions, remember to send an email to muauelias@gmail.com. I will see you in the next session of Unit 5. Bye-bye.